The morning sun cast gentle shadows across the park bench where James Morrison sat, briefcase beside him, newspaper open but unread. At 42, he'd built an empire in commercial real estate, yet lately found himself pausing in unexpected places, watching the world move around him with a weariness he couldn't quite name. He noticed her immediately, a small girl, perhaps 6 years old, with honey blonde curls cascading past her shoulders and the most determined expression he'd ever seen on a child's face. She wore a cream-colored dress with delicate lace trim, bright yellow socks that seemed to glow in the sunlight, and navy canvas shoes that had clearly seen many adventures. In her hands, she clutched what appeared to be a handmade card, its edges slightly crumpled from her tight grip. She stood about 10 feet away, studying him with the kind of intensity only children possess. James glanced around, expecting to see a parent nearby, but the girl appeared to be alone. Their eyes met, and something in her gaze made his chest tighten. It was a look he recognized from his own mirror on difficult days, a mixture of hope and barely contained sadness. She approached slowly, each step deliberate, as if she'd rehearsed this moment in her mind 100 times. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly, her voice carrying the careful politeness of a child raised with good manners. "My name is Emma Chen." James folded his newspaper and gave her his full attention. "Hello, Emma. I'm James. Are you lost? Where are your parents?" Emma's lower lip trembled slightly before she steadied herself. "My mama is waiting by the cafe over there. She can see us from there. I asked if I could talk to you alone." She paused, gathering courage. "Sir, I have a very important question to ask you." Something about her formality, the way she stood so straight despite her obvious nervousness, touched something deep within him. "All right," he said gently. "What's your question?" Emma took a deep breath, and the words tumbled out in a rush. "Could you pretend to be my daddy, just for one day, please?" James sat perfectly still, certain he'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what? My daddy?" Emma repeated, slower this time, her eyes beginning to glisten with unshed tears. "Could you pretend to be him, just for today? It's daddy-daughter day at my school tomorrow, and all the kids are making cards and planning what they'll do with their dads, and I don't have one." The card in her hands made sudden, heartbreaking sense. "Emma," James began carefully, "where is your father?" "I never had one," she said simply, with the matter-of-fact honesty of childhood. "Mama says she loved him very much, but he went to heaven before I was born. She has pictures, but I can't remember him because I never met him." A single tear escaped down her cheek. "Everyone at school has been talking about it for weeks, and I've been pretending I'm sick so I don't have to go tomorrow. But Mama knows. She always knows when I'm pretending." James felt something crack open inside his chest. He thought of his own childhood, of the father who'd worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table, but had never missed a school event. He thought of the years he'd spent building his company, telling himself that success would fill the emptiness left by a life lived alone. "Emma, I'm deeply honored that you'd ask me, but why me? There are other men in this park." She studied him with those old soul eyes. "You have kind eyes, and you look sad. Kind of like how Mama looks sometimes when she thinks I'm not watching. Mama says kind people who've been sad understand things better." She wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "Also, you're wearing a really nice suit, and I thought maybe you might know how to act like a dad is supposed to act." James couldn't help but smile at her logic. "I think your mother is a very wise woman, but Emma, this is something I'd need to talk to her about first. Would that be all right?" Emma's face lit up like sunrise. "Really? You'll come meet her?" "I will." She grabbed his hand with the unself-conscious trust of childhood, and James found himself being led across the park toward a small cafe with outdoor seating. There, at a corner table, sat a woman in her mid-30s. She had the same honey blonde hair as Emma, pulled back in a simple ponytail, and wore nurse's scrubs decorated with tiny cartoon characters. Her face showed the kind of tiredness that comes from working night shifts and raising a child alone. But her eyes were alert and watchful. As they approached, she stood quickly, her expression shifting from concern to confusion to something resembling embarrassed horror. "Emma Chen, what have you done?" she asked, though her voice held more exhaustion than anger. "Mama, this is James. I asked him my question, and he said yes, but he wanted to meet you first." The woman closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering strength. When she opened them, they glistened with unshed tears. "Sir, I am so sorry. I don't know what my daughter said to you, but please, you don't have to." "Mrs. Chen," James interrupted, gently. "It's Miss Sarah Chen." She laughed without humor. Though I suppose Emma already told you that story. She told me about the daddy-daughter day at school, and she asked if I would pretend to be her father for the event. He paused. I told her I'd like to speak with you about it first. Sarah sank back into her chair, covering her face with her hands. Oh, Emma, baby, you can't just ask strangers. Her voice broke. James pulled out a chair and sat down, gesturing for Emma to sit as well. Miss Jen, I understand this is unusual, more than unusual, but I wonder if you'd allow me to share something. Sarah lowered her hands, looking at him with red-rimmed eyes. 3 months ago, my father passed away, James said quietly. He was my best friend, my mentor, the man who taught me everything about being decent and hardworking. At his funeral, person after person stood up and talked about the small kindnesses he'd shown them. The time he'd helped a neighbor fix their roof, the college fund he'd secretly started for his secretary's grandson, the way he'd shown up, again and again, for people who had no one else. He looked at Emma, who was watching him with rapt attention. I built a successful company, but I never built a family. I told myself there was time for that later. And now, sitting in my empty apartment every night, I realize I've spent so much time making money that I forgot to make memories. Sarah's expression had softened, though wariness still lingered. I'm not suggesting anything inappropriate, James continued. I'm simply saying that maybe your daughter's request isn't as random as it seems. Maybe we all need each other in different ways. I would be honored to attend this school event with Emma, with your presence and permission, of course, and afterward, if you'd both like. Perhaps we could go for ice cream and talk about what it means to show up for people. The silence stretched between them, filled only with the ambient sounds of the city. Finally, Sarah spoke. Emma comes up with elaborate plans sometimes. Last month, she decided we should live in the public library because then she could read every book and we'd save money on rent. Despite her tears, she smiled. But this was different, wasn't it, baby? Emma nodded solemnly. I practiced asking him in my head for 3 days, Mama. I kept trying to be brave enough. 3 days. Sarah looked at James with new understanding. You sit here often. I've been taking my mornings slower lately, trying to figure out what comes next in life. This bench has become something of a thinking spot. Sarah reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. Then, to James's surprise, she reached for his as well. My husband, David, was a firefighter. He died saving people from a building collapse 3 months before Emma was born. He never got to know her, and she never got to know him. I've tried to be enough, but there are some holes that even the best mother can't fill alone. You've done beautifully, James said with conviction. Emma is thoughtful, articulate, brave, and kind. That comes from you. But she's also right. She needs to see what it looks like when good men show up, when they keep promises and act with integrity. Sarah took a shaky breath. If you're serious about this, truly serious, then yes, you may accompany us to the daddy-daughter day. But I'll be there too, every moment, and afterward. We'd all like that ice cream very much, Emma squealed with delight, bouncing in her chair. And so it was that the next day, James Morrison found himself standing in an elementary school gymnasium decorated with handmade banners proclaiming "We love our dads." He wore a more casual version of his usual suit, and Emma held his hand with a grip that suggested she thought he might disappear if she let go. They made picture frames together, decorating them with stickers and glitter. They competed in a 3-legged race, finishing last but laughing harder than anyone else. They ate cupcakes that Emma had helped her mother bake the night before, and James learned that 6-year-olds have very strong opinions about the correct ratio of frosting to cake. But the moment that changed everything came during the last activity. Each child was asked to share one thing they loved about their dad. Emma stood at the microphone, looking impossibly small in front of the crowd. "This is James," she said, her voice stronger than he'd expected. "He's not really my daddy, but today he's pretending to be, and he's doing a really good job. The thing I love most is that when I asked him for help, he said yes. My real daddy was a hero who saved people, and James is being a hero today too. Because sometimes people need saving from feeling lonely and left out." There wasn't a dry eye in the gymnasium. The months that followed brought changes none of them had anticipated. James began joining Sarah and Emma for dinner once a week. He attended Emma's school play, where she played a talking tree and forgot half her lines but smiled the entire time. He taught her to ride a bicycle in the park where they'd first met, running behind her with his hand on the seat until that magical moment when she found her balance and he let go. Sarah and James discovered They shared a love of old movies and spicy food. They talked about loss and loneliness, about the courage it takes to keep going when life hasn't turned out as planned. They learned to trust again, slowly, carefully, like people who'd both been hurt before and refused to be careless with each other's hearts. On the anniversary of that first meeting, James returned to his thinking bench. Emma and Sarah sat beside him, one on each side. "I've been thinking about what it means to show up," James said. "My father showed up for everyone. I'd forgotten that lesson until a brave little girl reminded me." "You showed up for us," Sarah said softly. "You keep showing up." Emma leaned against James's arm. "Are you going to keep showing up? Like, forever?" James looked at Sarah, and in her eyes, he saw the question she was too careful to ask aloud. He thought about his empty apartment, about the life he'd built that had looked successful but felt hollow. He thought about family dinners and homework help and teaching someone to ride a bike. He thought about second chances and unexpected grace. Forever is a very long time. He said seriously to Emma, "But yes, if your mama says it's okay, I'd like to keep showing up, every day, if you'll have me." Sarah's tears came freely now. "I think we'd like that very much." Years later, when people asked James about the turning point in his life, he always told them about the day a little girl in yellow socks taught him that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say yes. He learned that family isn't always something you're born into. Sometimes it's something you choose. Sometimes it's built on park benches and in school gymnasiums, in the space between loneliness and hope, in the courage to believe that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. And Emma, she grew up knowing that she had been loved by two fathers, one who'd given his life for strangers, teaching her about sacrifice and courage, and another who'd given his time and heart to a lonely little girl, teaching her that kindness doesn't have to be blood deep to be real. On her wedding day, years later, Emma stood between two pictures, one of a young firefighter she'd never met, but who'd loved her before she was born, and one of a businessman in a blue suit who'd sat on a park bench on an ordinary morning and let a child change his life. They both showed up, she told her mother as they prepared to walk down the aisle, where James waited to give her away. "That's what love does. It shows up." And Sarah, holding her daughter's hand, thought about that day in the park when Emma's courage had saved them all.